Hello, my name is Oreoluwa Ajayi. I am 25 years old. I'm an urban designer and social innovation strategist. I work with Fabulous Urban Nigeria Foundation, where we develop urban design guidelines, especially for emerging markets, disadvantaged communities, and vulnerable groups. And I am on Young Sustainability Professionals with Agatha. What is green infrastructure and why is it important for urban environments? Green infrastructures are natural and semi-natural systems and elements that are within the urban fabric. This can be parks, gardens, biospheres. Biospheres means lakes, smaller lakes within urban fabrics. It could also mean green roofs. It could mean playgrounds or road medians that are green. So any elements of greenery in a city or an urban center can be referred to as green infrastructure. But lately, it's now going into discussions around new energy. So when we talk about solar systems, they are now regarded as elements of green infrastructure. Basically, green infrastructure are supposed to help combine how we live in cities with the responsibility of not affecting nature. So we are trying to live in a city, but living cohesively with nature. So there's a balance between allowing nature within our artificial cities. And why are they important for urban environments? They help us to improve our quality of life, basically. They improve the air quality. Green infrastructures as well help with social cohesion. So when there are urban parks, you find a lot of, especially youthful people, gathering there. So it helps for social bonding, it helps for communalism, and having a sense of attachment to certain areas. So what motivated me to pursue a career in urban design and sustainability? So I have a background in urban and regional planning from the University of Ilorin. So after finishing school, I got a job in a physical development consultancy firm in Lagos here, where I was fortunate to work on the review of the Alimosho Model City Plan. And it was in this, while I was on this job, I realized that there's so much distance between ensuring that our urban cities are really green and the skills and professionals needed to make this happen. So this is why I've been on a journey to continue to explore how can I leverage green infrastructures for better urban living in urban planning and urban design. Because I can't even remember the last time I saw a butterfly, right? So if you have green areas, you see butterflies, they pollinate the flowers, and you don't have them anymore, that means there's a balance that's been distorted, and this affects biodiversity and the general range of organisms that are in urban environments. And little do we know that all of these organisms, by the way nature has positioned them to be, are supposed to be essential in helping us live a more better and cohesive life. What local sustainability initiative in Nigeria inspires me the most? So I'm an advocate for urban green spaces, right? And urban green spaces have to do with improving the green cover in urban areas. So moving into that, one local initiative that I've actually gotten my heart has to be EcoTutu. So EcoTutu makes use of clean technology to provide cold storage solutions to traders who deal in perishable markets to extend the shelf life of their produce. This, I actually believe, if it can be done in a larger scale, can help us mitigate issues of food insecurity in the long run. How can green infrastructure promote social equity in urban areas? First, what is social equity? Social and equity. Social essentially means how do humans interact? How do we interact? How do I perceive you to another person? What's my opinion about how we are even living together? Then equity means, do I have equal chance to interact with people? So green infrastructure help with social equity in such that, like I talked about, urban parks or gardens or playgrounds being examples for green infrastructure. So if there are places like this in, let's say, especially disadvantaged communities, it now makes people, vulnerable groups who live in disadvantaged communities, have access to playgrounds, and they can now recreate and meet people then there's a bond, there's some sort of social cohesiveness. Look at football, for instance, or any sport, basketball. If you go there, people talk to each other, people even get business opportunities from being in places like this. So in an instance where only some certain people have access to parks, so they can leverage these benefits in parks, and some people don't have access to the parks, that they can't even understand the benefits of it, that's social injustice. So when we are talking about social equity in urban infrastructure, it's basically trying to ensure that people have access to this green infrastructure regardless of where you are, regardless of where you come from, regardless of where you live. Every urban resident is supposed to be entitled to green infrastructure to improve their quality of life. So can you share a project where you combine social impact with green infrastructure? Yeah, so eco spaces. So at eco spaces, we repurpose shipping containers to co-working spaces and integrate them within urban parks. So I feel this is a very great example of how we can combine social impact and green infrastructure. Green infrastructure such as the urban parks already have their jobs to serve as a melting point for residents to meet and interact. But when we are now creating co-working spaces, and let's say we are now having classes or conversations or promoting developments in the area of green skills, right, in the areas of technology, now that's social impact to residents who live around this facility. So that can be seen as an example of how green infrastructure can improve social impact and even environmental and economic impact too as well, because it improves the property value of that supposed location. Why is understanding local context crucial when planning green infrastructure projects? I can't overemphasize the need for local context when making plans, because I've seen hands-on while I was working as an urban design consultant how it is that when we adopt certain urban design principles from Western world and we try to replicate it here, our cultural beliefs or our way of living just doesn't fit with it. So it's very necessary to understand how we interact, how we perceive our society, so we can know what people actually really want. We can identify the knowledge gaps and profile real solutions to address practical problems. I believe understanding local context actually also has to do with understanding like certain types of indigenous or native plants or vegetations that might be able to grow and sustain an urban park in a certain area. Geography and climate varies from place to place, so you need to understand the local geography, the local climate of a certain area. You need to understand the social way of life. You need to understand the historical beliefs. You need to understand cultural beliefs of certain areas. There's an example of a project, I'm trying to remember the name right now, but I think it's the Medellin project in Colombia, where they created an urban park they created an urban park as a suspended facility. So there was already an highway, then there was like a water body, but they were able to creatively create an embankment over the road and created an urban park over the road to improve pedestrian traffic from this side of the road to the other side of the road. I'm not really even saying we go that far to do capital intensive projects for urban parks, but very importantly, we need to be able to understand that the end goal still remains the same, right? So we could leverage things like green roofs in especially our eyebrow areas. We could leverage green vertical walls, so we could promote people having plants over their walls. I've seen instances like that on walls, on fences. We realize that places where there are more greens, if you visit Ikoyi or VI, you would have a sense of a better quality of air in places like that than when you are in places like Oshodi. And it's not because it just happens, it's because green plants and whatnot have a way of sequestrating carbon from the atmosphere. So carbon are constituents that make the air very, very polluted, right? So but trees absorb this carbon, so that's why when you are in certain places you feel more relaxed, you feel less psychological stress than other places. So I feel we could make use of creating pocket parks in neighborhoods. We might not necessarily need a large expanse of land, right? pocket parks can work with like a plot of land. So in certain neighborhoods, there are houses that are not even being used. Why don't we repurpose this kind of buildings through PPP, public-private partnerships, and create green race and cafe? So we just repurpose that building into a cafe, then surround it with greens. Then where we are able to have spaces for larger parks, we can do that. Then also make use of green roofs, create artificial ponds, wetlands, to actually help retain water and reduce runoff of excess water. So how do you balance aesthetics with functionality in green space designs? I believe functionality is the main bane for urban design. So if I'm designing anything, I'm designing a layout for a community, or I'm just designing a site plan for a certain infrastructure or industrial facility, I need to balance functionality and aesthetics. It's not going to make sense for something to be beautiful, but you can use it. And it's not going to make sense for you to be able to use something and it's not enticing. So if we are able to marry both, we'd be able to create a more functional system. It's funny how green elements, green infrastructure already have a way of beautifying the environment, right? So that is why you now need professionals to actually make these things work and ensure that people are even inclined to want to use this, or they are inclined to see it as a project that is theirs too, not just executing the project and pushing it down the throats of people. My next question: how do you incorporate climate resilience into your urban green space designs? So the major reasons for urban infrastructure is to improve the climate resilience of these places, right, of certain regions. So climate resilience means how good can a certain region bounce back from effects of certain disasters, natural disasters, or even disasters that are caused by man but have an influence on nature. How do I mean? Like, let's say we have a problem of flooding, right? So how do we incorporate climate resilience into urban green space designs to address flooding? So I talked about stormwater management. That's by the use of having these parks, because there's a way open grounds absorb water than when you have concrete everywhere. So places where you have so much concrete and plasters and like hard surfaces, there's high water runoff. So water don't get to permeate into the soil. For instance, sometimes I also leverage and look at using permeable interlocking stones, such that they are interlocking stones, right? They serve their purpose as interlocking stones, as hard surfaces, but they have holes, or they have been designed to have holes within them, such that when rain falls, it goes into the soil. So there is less water that runs off the surface of the floor or of the ground, and this can reduce flooding by a certain percentage. So in this way, we are actually trying to combat climate crisis, climate change, by providing green infrastructure to improve the resilience of this region. Yeah, then when we talk about eco spaces too as well, the project is going to actually help with climate resilience, because it's going to be increasing the capacity of young people and not so young people around this region to learn green skills, go into solar installations, go into building softwares or whatnot, whatever it is that is going to improve the climate of that area. So if we are able to create projects like this, they would help in the long run, short-term, medium and long-term goals to achieve climate resilience. What common obstacles do you face in implementing green infrastructure in densely populated areas? So number one is I think the perception of the people to green infrastructure. And it's not the problem of the people, because a lot of people don't even understand why we need green infrastructure. So we need to still do a lot of work with advocating on why green infrastructure is necessary. It's evident. We also need some enforcement from our design professionals, or policies that could enforce whatever designs we are making, but for people to be able to see the greater good for what it is that you're doing. Then another obstacle I realized is the affinity, like the strong relationships people have with their landed properties. So I think it's in just some few cases that people already intentionally decide to use a certain piece of land for a recreational purpose that works. But when you are trying to tell people that live in densely populated areas that, oh, you guys need this, like for instance, I know I did a little research in Yaba to understand how people even cope living in a densely populated area like this, and you barely have a space to go and decompress. There are sometimes you have so much mental stress that being inside your house doesn't even solve it. You need to be in an open air space and just breathe in, breathe out. So I feel a lot of people are attached to their existing way of life so that they don't really see the need for this green infrastructure. And I feel like this is why more exposed people, right, or more learned people actually understand this green infrastructure. Because when you go to places of like elites, right, you tend to see elements of greenery around them. They like some sense of stillness. But when you're in a densely populated area, reverse is the case, and it's now always looking like, what are we not really doing right? So the real concern now is there are different uses for land, not just homes, not just residences. And I think I have conversations like this too with real estate developers. You don't just build. You need to be able to have spaces where people can interact, recreate. So in a different definition for urban planning, we are supposed to manage land, right, to empower people to live, work, and recreate sustainably. So if you are living in your house, you are working in an office, you need to be able to recreate. Now that's now going to be a work-life balance. But if you don't see a place to recreate for free, right, because there are places where you could recreate too, like the mall and the likes, but you have to go and spend your money. But there's supposed to be places where you can go to and meet people, like-minded people. So I think we need a reorientation of making people understand why these facilities are needed and how it would improve their own life in the long run. How can urban planners measure the success of green infrastructure projects in terms of environmental and social impact? So for instance, I think I would still make mention of the ecospaces project, right? So one of the concepts that I used when I was developing the ecospaces project is the concept of highest and best use analysis. So now in that concept, there is a way that situating a certain facility can improve the general economic value of the landed property around there. So let's say you live in Shomoli. By the instant that there is a growth pole industry, a facility that brings people to that place, the value of property around that place improves, right? That can be a way to measure. So what's the property value in this area like before? What is it like after you have now brought in this? You could also measure environmental changes using remote sensing tools, GIS tools, surveys, understanding the perception of people. We can also take measurements on air quality, right? Measure what it is like in places where there are less greenery, and measure the air quality in places where there are more greenery. You could also measure the rate of water, right? When there is flooding, there are ways where we can measure the impact of flood, right? So when we are able to do compare and contrast for like projects, green projects, and places where there is an absence of green projects, we can now find how they are really very beneficial. What were your key takeaways from your experience as a TECA Fellow and in the START Global Fellowship Incubator? So while I was in the urban design consultancy industry as at last year, I took a leave of absence in January this year, and that was because I saw a lot of social problems exacerbated our urban challenges, right? And I'm of the opinion that until we get to understand social design, it will be hard to prefer physical development structures. So I applied to join the TECA Fellowship. So TECA means Triggering Exponential Climate Action. So it's basically a fellowship where they help fellows develop climate resilient ventures. So we went into the fellowship to learn how to build a startup that is addressing a real life social problem, right, as well as improving efforts at addressing climate change. So and I think that has helped me to create a real sense of bringing a balance between social service and economic prosperity, right? As much as we want a decent community, right, we also want it to be profitable or economically sustainable, so we can manage whatever project it is that we are doing. Then in the START Global Fellowship Incubator too as well, in the TECA, right, I think one of the major one of the major concerns was on how to leverage technology to actually build these solutions, right? Technology, AI, IoT, whatnot, to build climate resilient ventures. Then in the START Global Fellowship, it was more of the entrepreneurship way of operating businesses down to business development. So I learned a lot about business development, founders agreements, how to go into partnerships, what to look out for in co-founding partners, and a whole host of other things that is necessary for an entrepreneur to understand what it takes to build climate resilient startups. There's a principle that says you get money in exchange for value provided. So if you are really passionate about something, a problem, and you're able to bring in a solution, you get value for it, whether it's money you want or you want fame, whatnot. But ensure that whatever it is that you're trying to address in sustainable urban development, you're really passionate about it to understand why does this exist and how can we make it work. So the why behind whatever it is that you're doing is very, very important to ensure longevity in that career success. There are a lot of sustainability professionals that I've met lately that have backgrounds in certain other professions, like maybe banking, law, medicine, comms specialists, but they are doing very well in discussing sustainability matters, and that's because they've been able to bring the conversations of sustainability into their careers and understand the intersection. So, and that is why I feel like as a designer, so I feel like this is why it's very necessary to understand why you're doing certain things. You could be an accountant and you really still want to go into sustainable urban development. How does it align with accounting? There are things about sustainable finance, how to get money to fund projects. You are into sociology, how do you get into sustainable urban development? There's room for everyone, basically, and I think ChatGPT can be your friend. Just discuss with ChatGPT, how can my career advance sustainable urban development? And I'm going to assure you that you'd get good answers. Then if you can work towards that with a real drive for what sustainable urban development is trying to address, you would make good progress. Okay, I have my last question here. Where do you envision your career in green infrastructure heading in the next few years? So the green infrastructure space is a very novel space, especially in our climate. In emerging markets, it's still a new industry. So I see myself as a thought leader, as a front runner, and as a person of actionable insights when it comes to green infrastructure. I see myself as a consultant to discuss and help businesses to improve their operations. I really look forward to creating a more cohesive, sustainable, inclusive, greener city within especially emerging markets, emerging economies, and ensure that everyone has access to green spaces, everyone has access to an improved quality of life, and we can continue the conversations like that lifelong. Thank you very much.